President Trump now saying he will double tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel imports. He says it's a response to Ontario, the province of Ontario, placing a 25% surcharge on electricity coming into 3 U.S. neighboring states. And joining us now, the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford. Premier Ford, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, what's your reaction when you heard this latest news?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Wolf. And it's disappointing, and I'll tell you the reason it's disappointing, because Americans are going to pay more. They only have the capacity, the U.S. only has the capacity of producing 16% of the aluminum they need. Pretty well almost the balance comes over 60% comes from Quebec. So costs are going to go up along with aluminum and steel. Let's focus on the real problem, and that's China. You know, bringing transshipments in and costing American and Canadian jobs. I want to make sure that we send more electricity. Well, if I want to send more critical minerals, but there was an unprovoked attack on Canada, on families, on jobs, on businesses. For what reason? You know, the market's speaking loud and clear. Consumer confidence is down. The market's tumbling. You know, there's going to be plants closed in the U.S. Assembly plants will shut down because they won't have the aluminum, or they'll be paying 2x, 3x as much. This is absolute chaos created by one person, and that's Donald Trump, not the American people. I always say Canadians love Americans. I love Americans, and this has to stop. Let's sit around the table and negotiate a new deal, even though he created the deal in the first place.
Yeah, and as someone who grew up in Western New York and Buffalo along the border with Canada, I can honestly say I love Canadians as well. Talk a little bit about Ontario, your province, and the electrical power it shares with states in the United States along the border. A lot of it is coming from Ontario, right?
That's correct. We power 1.5 million homes and businesses in New York and Michigan and in Minnesota. I just got off the phone with Governor Whitmer. I consider her a friend. We've worked together for 7 years. She's a wonderful person, and I apologize to her. She understands. But what I recommend is on the electricity bill, put down this increase is a tariff from Trump. It's a Trump tariff, which is basically a Trump tax.
As you know, you've called this an unprovoked trade and tariff war initiated by the United States against Canada. Trump is saying that Canada pays very little for national security and relies on the U.S. for military protection. What's your response to him on that issue?
I agree that we have to meet our 2% commitment, our NATO commitment. I've said it for years. Other premiers all signed agreements sending it to the federal government. We spend 1.4% on defense. It needs to go up to 2%. We have to pitch in our share. 100%, I agree on the 2%.
Yeah, that's what he's been saying now for the last several years. The NATO allies have to increase their spending to come up to what the U.S. percentage of military spending is. His latest Truth Social post earlier today, Premier, also doubled down on Trump's desire for Canada to become the 51st state of the United States, saying the brilliant "O Canada" anthem will continue to play. How do Canadians feel about what the President Trump is saying about Canada becoming part of the United States and even allowing "O Canada," a beautiful national anthem, to continue playing?
Well, obviously the Canadians are infuriated, and what it's done, it's united the whole country, and the patriotism is running wild across the country. The likes I've never seen before in my entire life. We'll never become the 51st state. Canada's not for sale, and we want a great trading partner. We had the greatest neighbors in the world, the U.S., and it's not the American people. They didn't vote President Trump in on this type of mandate. He had a mandate to lower inflation, lower cost of living, create more jobs, and it's backfired on him. Inflation's going up, jobs will be lost. He's taking more money out of Americans' pockets. For what reason? We're still trying to figure this out. Let's sit down at the table and negotiate this deal. If there's things he doesn't like, then we sit down and we have a conversation. But just going tit for tat back and forth, all it does is hurt Americans and Canadians. It's unacceptable.
Before I let you go, Premier, I want to ask one final question. Trump is calling on Canada to drop its tariff on dairy products. Is this a realistic request?
Well, it's one of the items that obviously it gets under his skin. Let's sit down and talk about it. That is as simple as that. Let's renegotiate the USMCA. Let's stop the bleeding on both sides of the border as China's sitting there laughing at both countries. Let's sit down and negotiate a fair trade for both countries, and everyone benefits.
Yeah, it's amazing what's going on. Hard to believe. As a kid growing up in Buffalo, New York, along the border with Canada, whenever I would go to a Buffalo Sabres hockey game, they'd always play the U.S. national anthem, but they would always play "Oh Canada" as well, because so many of the hockey players, almost all of them, were Canadians. And I just remember that as a kid growing up. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, thanks very much for joining us.
We thought it would help to give a bit of a debrief, catch you up. President Trump started his tariff tango with Mexico, Canada, and China on January 31st. He paused it 3 days later for 1 month. The next day, China tariffs took effect. Canada and Mexico followed in March, but just a day after those tariffs took effect, the president announced a carve-out for automakers. A day after that, a 1-month delay for other products. On March 7th, he threatened reciprocal tariffs on Canadian dairy and lumber. That brings us to the announcement that we have been telling you about this morning on steel and aluminum. Okay, digest all that for a second, and now we're going to get an explanation and the ramifications politically from our talented group of reporters here, Sabrina Rodriguez of The Washington Post, CNN's David Chalian, and CNN's Jeff Zeleny. You catch all that? Wow. David Chalian, I'm going to start with you because it is confusing. It is uncertain. It is trademark Donald Trump to govern by chaos, as we've said time and time again. But it is also trademark Donald Trump to care about the markets.
Well, I think that's why you saw some of that whiplash.
Yeah.
Some of that was in response to the markets,
Yep.
right? Not just to inject chaos for chaos's sake. I know he told reporters last week he doesn't watch the markets. I just,
And there's a bridge he can buy.
Exactly. There's absolutely no truth to that. And, he's going later to talk to the Business Roundtable. And, he is clearly getting a lot of input, not just from Republicans on Capitol Hill, but from a lot of the high dollar donor business people, the business community. These folks have inputs into Donald Trump. And I've talked to some Wall Street folks, both supporters of the president and not supporters of the president, all of whom work for these big banks and financial institutions, who say that there's a mood shift right now, and there's real concern in the marketplace. I mean, we see it obviously in what the Dow is doing, but there's a real concern that there is not a long-term plan here.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane. It is about the 8th reason we've had for the tariffs. And now he's saying he's putting 50% tariffs on Canada unless they agree to become the 51st state. That is insane. There is just no other way of describing it. And the trouble, Kelly, is that it shows there are no bounds around President Trump. This is very different from the first administration, where there were people around him who seemed to, I don't know what the word is, but smooth over some of the edges now. And the other thing that's not talked about, Kelly, is what's going on within the administration in terms of how they're treating the Constitution and laws. I think all of that is bad for the attraction of capital. And the gentleman from Bridgewater is 100% right. We need massive amounts of capital if we want to fund our deficits, pay for the things we want to pay for, sell our bonds, and have high stock prices. And it seems as if this administration is doing everything it can to chase foreign capital away.
Well, the view, of course, has been one of shock and outrage, as you can imagine. The part of the complexity here is it would make sense for our political leaders to actually be working towards renegotiating USMCA early, actually putting everything on the table and saying, all right, what's the real agenda? What would you like? And how do we renegotiate it? The problem is none of our leadership really wants to be seen to be backing down or even being conciliatory in the face of threats to annex our country. And we don't know how serious those threats are, but we're being made to understand that we should take them seriously. So it puts us in a bit of a box. We'd like our leaders to be able to negotiate because that seems like the rational course. It seems as though the old way of trading is over. But politically, it's hard to make nice with this president right now.
Apparently, his talk of annexing Canada and making it a 51st state is something that he talks about publicly and privately. It came up with Mr. Trudeau earlier this week. What are the private conversations like in terms of how to deal with Trump?
They have varied over time. And remember, much of the outgoing administration here, Prime Minister Trudeau and his cabinet, dealt with the president in his first term, and they renegotiated a major trade deal. They renegotiated NAFTA. So they knew how, they thought, to deal with him. And you do deal with him with strength. So what you're seeing by way of these countervailing or reciprocatory tariffs is a show of strength on our part, because that's the understanding of what we need to do here. It might backfire, it might not. What we aren't going to see are Canadian politicians who just lay down, because as I say, when you hear talk of crossing borders, whether it's Greenland or Panama or Canada, it sort of behooves our leadership to stand up to that. And what we're hearing, and it's now becoming more and more public by our political leadership, is take this seriously. This isn't actually just empty. And then the question goes, and I'll turn it back to you and the American citizens, including your members of Congress. How serious do we take it? What is the rule of law around this kind of thing in the States? But at the moment, it would be ideal if we could contain this to a trade issue that we need to negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the open question here as well. I guess the last thing I would ask you is how has it changed how the Canadian people see the American people?
People to people, not in any way, I would say, in the sense that a lot of Canadians live in the States some of the time. Many, many Canadians work in the States. We have friends and family. We, of course, love America and have respected and appreciated it for thousands of years, for hundreds and hundreds of years. The trouble, of course, is it's hard to divorce those feelings from how we feel about your government. And I can tell you in a very personal way, I can be rational about this as a business journalist and look at the issues for what they are, which is, there are some grains of truth in what the Trump administration is saying about trade, manufacturing, jobs, how you might do things differently. We may be in a new era of trade, and it's important for Canada to accept that. But when it comes to somebody talking about taking over your country, the feelings you have as a reaction aren't very journalistic. They're just human, and you get a kind of a moral outrage. So Canadians will be fighting some of that. Look for it in your tourism data. Look for it in people choosing to stay home instead of going south, because you might see more of that, unfortunately.
I mean, I think this builds to something, Annie, that we're seeing in every economic indicator. And it's that Trump was lying to his supporters and the country when he said that his initial goals would be a white-hot economy.
Guys, Trump is backing down. Just in a matter of hours. I played you that there, but the culmination of it, guys, because Canada stood strong, as people are saying, elbows up, coined by the NDP, not the Liberals or the Conservatives, but the NDP, the party that Canadians should vote for. That's my position. But the bigger point is that Canadians are standing up together. Again, I'm an NDP supporter. I'm voting NDP in the next election. But this is very rare for me to share Doug Ford and not be criticizing him. And I think Trump realizes, or Trump's advisors, maybe the least dumb people in the room, are saying, sir, you've united a country. You've taken a country that was pretty divided on a lot of important questions. And they're still kind of divided on those important questions. And you've unified them. So your 50% tariff you wanted to throw on tomorrow, you got to back down. And in a rare moment of relative non-insanity for Trump, he listened. So keep this in mind. Everyone is against him. Canadians, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of Americans, the business news, his advisors, I guarantee you behind closed doors. No one is with you, Donald. Stop this madness now.